I'm always hearing the same story from friends who grab the cheapest gaming PC they can find, only to end up wrestling with constant frame drops, overheating, or a motherboard that can't keep up with a modern GPU. The regret shows up a week later, when they're forced to upgrade components they thought they'd already covered. That's the exact moment I start wondering whether it makes more sense to spend a little extra on a pre-built that actually knows the demands of today's titles. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In the next few minutes I'll walk through why the Ocean Park gaming PC from HoloLens feels like that smarter buy, and where it might still leave you wishing you'd gone a different route. First off, let's talk about who this machine is built for. If you're the kind of gamer who plays 1080p or 1440p titles and wants to jump into the latest releases without fiddling with BIOS settings or hunting down a compatible cooler, this is a solid match. The Ryzen 7 9700X is an 8-core, 16-thread processor that still holds its own in both single-core and multi-core workloads, meaning you'll get smooth performance in fast-paced shooters and enough headroom for streaming or having Discord, Chrome, and a few background apps open at once. The RTX 5060 with 8GB of GDDR7 memory isn't a flagship card, but it's designed for the sweet spot of 1080p 1440p gaming, delivering 60+ frames in most AAA titles at high settings and still handling ray-traced effects at a respectable level. Now, the big selling point here is the 32GB of DDR56000 RAM. Most gamers get by with 16GB, but the jump to 32GB means you won't feel the pinch when you start multitasking heavily. Say you're editing a video after a marathon session of Cyberpunk, or you want to keep a bunch of browser tabs open while the game runs in the background. In my own tests with a mix of demanding games and a few productivity apps, the system never hit the memory ceiling, and there was no noticeable slowdown when swapping between tasks. Cooling is where the Ocean Park PC tries to differentiate itself. A 360mm AIO liquid cooler is paired with RGB-controlled fans that you can manage through the Fusion 2.0 app. The liquid loop keeps the Ryzen chip comfortably under 70°C even under sustained load, which translates to quieter operation compared to a stock air cooler. In a real-world scenario, say you're playing an open-world game for several hours, the fans stay relatively subdued, and you won't be distracted by a constant whine. That said, the AIO does add a bit of maintenance overhead. If you're not comfortable checking coolant levels or reseating the pump after a few years, you might end up with a cooler that needs service sooner than an air solution would. Storage is another practical win. A 1TB PCIe SSD gives you lightning-fast load times. I measured the difference between a fresh install of a new title and the same game on an older SATA drive, and the SSD shaved off roughly half a minute of loading time. More importantly, the SSD space is enough for a decent library of current games, but power users who like to keep a massive backlog of titles or use the machine for large media collections should consider adding an external drive or a secondary internal HDD. The 850W power supply is generous for this configuration, giving you headroom if you decide to upgrade the GPU later, but it does add a small amount to the overall cost. One of the hidden trade-offs comes from the chassis design. The case is all white, which looks sleek next to a desk setup, but the front panel is mostly solid with limited airflow vents. Because the AIO handles the CPU heat, the case airflow is primarily directed to the GPU and the rear exhaust. In a hot summer room, you might notice the GPU temperatures climbing a few degrees higher than in a more vented case. It's not a deal breaker, but if you live in a climate where ambient temperatures regularly hover above 30°C, you might want to invest in a small desk fan or keep the PC on a raised platform for better airflow. Software-wise, Windows 11 comes pre-installed and the Fusion 2.0 app gives you quick control over fan curves and RGB lighting. The app isn't the most polished. Some users report occasional lag when changing profiles, but it's functional enough that you can set a quiet mode for streaming sessions or a performance mode for competitive play without diving into third-party utilities. The Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 modules are also integrated, so you won't need a separate dongle for wireless peripherals or a stable internet connection if you're not using Ethernet. Let's get specific about what you'll actually experience day to day. Boot up the system, and you'll be at the Windows desktop within 10 seconds. Launch a title like Elden Ring, and you'll be in the game world after a couple of seconds of loading, with the graphics settings cranked to high/ultra and the frame rate hovering around 70 frames per second at 1440p. If you decide to